Today, we have the opportunity to speak with Professor Claudia Gray, a pediatrician based in Cape Town, South Africa, with a subspecialty in allergology. Professor Gray is currently working in the UK as an associate professor of pediatrics at the University of Cape Town, as well as a specialist in her own practice, the Kidsallergy Centre. In her work, she examines all aspects of pediatric food allergies and has a keen interest in the particular correlation between food allergy and eczema. We know food is so important, and we know many of you listeners out there struggle with food issues and intolerances, whether you might have that might be the feeding patterns of your exceptional kiddos or managing their food allergies. That is why we are especially interested to hear from Professor Gray today. So let's get started. Welcome, Claudia. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today at the Brain Possible, all the way from Cape Town in South Africa. First, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to this work in particular, and what made you so passionate about the food allergies in the pediatric population?
Yeah, Emily, I'm a pediatrician first and foremost. And I think since I was a little girl, I always wanted to work with children. That was my first love. I always loved little kids. I had lots of little cousins and used to babysit them and write them books. And I loved the combination of sort of the human side together with science, and that brought me into medicine or medical school after school. And I think straight away in the medical field, I realized my passion was for children, so in pediatrics. So it was pretty much a no-brainer for me to specialize in pediatrics. I did my basic degree in South Africa, and then in fact I specialized in pediatrics in the United Kingdom, so in London. And as I was specializing there, this field of allergy or allergology was actually a very small field at that stage. We're talking a good 15, 16, 17 years ago when I was busy specializing. And one of my consultants said to me one day, allergies are really on the increase and we hardly learn anything about them. Why not do a subspecialization in allergology? So that got me thinking, and I thought, that's pretty neat. So I did a master's in the UK, and then I did a PhD when we had come back to South Africa. And I realized it was a topic that was often misunderstood. And I often say to my patients, I spend as much time telling people they don't have an allergy and recognizing that as I do telling them they do have an allergy and diagnosing and managing that correctly. And it turned out I was pretty lucky going into that field because these waves of allergies have sort of followed my specializing in it. We call it the allergy epidemic. So the first wave was asthma and eczema and allergic rhinitis of the nose. And recently, slightly more recently, the second wave has been the wave of food allergy. And I particularly enjoyed the interaction between food allergies and eczema and the correct diagnosis and management of food allergies. So I'm passionate about helping the little kids and actually getting it right and giving them a structured and correct management plan with that.
Okay, well, so there's a lot there to learn from. And you're right. I like how you call them an epidemic, because they, in my mind, they really are. I wish that it was spoken about more in maybe mainstream media about this childhood epidemic of allergies. So we know that you're particularly interested in the connection between food allergies and eczema, even going so far as to basing your PhD on the subject. What is the connection between the two? Can you dive into that a little bit?
Sure, Emily, this would be a whole talk in itself. It's a complicated and interconnected connection. And I always, when I try and describe it in talks or to students, I always say there are three components. Okay. The one component is, we get something called the allergy march or the atopic march, in which children with one particular type of allergy just seem more predisposed over time to developing other allergies. So they march from one allergic manifestation into the other. So often it's eczema and then food allergies, then asthma and allergic rhinitis. So if you've got the genetics for allergies, then often you just have these coexistent allergies, whether they're connected or not. You often have eczema and a food allergy. So the first connection is just that they occur in a person with those genes, those allergy genes. So they just occur side by side. And if you have eczema, for example, you do have a higher risk of developing food allergies. You're not guaranteed to have a food allergy, but you are at higher risk. And over time, we've learned actually that one of the main reasons for this is that your disrupted skin barrier is not very good at protecting you, first of all, against irritants and infections, but also against allergens. So if you have a kid with eczema and a broken or leaky skin barrier, if you have a mum or dad who's eating a peanut butter sandwich in the background, the peanut particles in the air or on their hands can go through that broken skin and set up a response. And I often say to my patients or young mothers, the skin is not very good at deciding whether a food is a goodie or a baddie. So it often misclassifies it as a baddie and reacts to it, whereas your gut is much better at discerning and accepting things that are actually harmless. So there's the connection, the side-by-side coexistence of eczema and food allergy. Then there's a causal relationship. So many decades ago, people used to think that food allergies cause eczema. And a lot of people are still under that impression, saying, well, my kid's got eczema. What food is causing this? Most parents come to the office and say, what is causing my child's eczema? And I have to spend a lot of time explaining to them that mostly it's the child's genetics that are causing their eczema. So where we used to think food allergies cause eczema, and that can occur, for example, in young babies with a cow's milk protein allergy who present with eczema as well as colic, it could well be that the cow's milk protein or even soya protein is exacerbating the eczema. So that can occur in a small percentage of patients. But in an even bigger percentage of patients, the causal relationship is actually in the opposite direction. So instead of food allergies causing eczema, we've now learned over the last decade or so that it's more likely that eczema causes food allergies. And that's because of this epithelial barrier loss that I was talking about, that you have an exposure through the skin to allergens. Skin just isn't very good at deciding whether this is something dangerous or something that we should tolerate. So then the skin decides, whoa, is this a parasite? And it sets up an allergic response. And when the child is then exposed to it via the gut, the allergy cells are ready to pounce on that food and say, we think you're bad. So the relationship between eczema and food allergies has almost changed over the years, from food allergies causing eczema to the greater knowledge that in many cases it's the eczema causing the food allergies. So it's complicated.
It sounds it. Okay, so you said a few times that genetics play a role. Now, are there tests for that? Is it something that you can test and see? Oh, I see that they have this gene that, yeah?
That's also actually a very sophisticated question. I'd say when I talk about genetics, it doesn't necessarily need to be eczema. It could be any allergy gene. So if say a child is born to parents who don't have any allergies, that new baby, even nowadays, has a 10 and up to 20% chance of having a manifestation of allergies, be it asthma or eczema or allergic rhinitis or food allergies. So if our parents don't have allergies, we're not totally off the hook. But if our parents do have allergies, if the mum has an allergy, your child automatically has a 50% chance of having some kind of an allergic disorder. If mum and dad or mum and a sibling, two first-degree relatives, have some sort of allergy, the child has an 80% chance of having an allergic manifestation. And just from that relationship, we can see that the genes transfer that tendency. But as with most medical conditions, we know that it's just the combination of genetics and environmental factors, so epigenetic factors. In some complicated immune disorders, in which eczema is one of the many manifestations, there are genetic tests. But there isn't just a genetic test for the average kid on the street to say, you will have eczema, you won't have eczema. So genetics are, of course, becoming much more sophisticated. And for our more severe eczemas, which are part of a primary immune deficiency, for example, yes, you can have genetic testing, but it's not something that's freely available just for any kid where the mum wants to know, will my kid get eczema?
Right. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around all this information. And so the rates are on the rise. And what is causing them, in your mind, to be rising?
So, Emily, this is a question that scientists throughout the world are pondering with and are exploring.
Yeah.
If I gave you a clear answer, I would be insincere. So,
That's
essentially, the theories have been evolving over time. So probably 20 years ago or so, we had this theory called the hygiene hypothesis, that maybe allergies are on the increase because we are just too clean. We are scrubbing our skins with soap. We are, washing our dishes with the dishwasher. We are sanitizing our pacifiers. We are sanitizing our kitchen counters. And we are living too cleanly. And somehow this is shifting the immune system from needing to fight infections to setting up allergies. So essentially that hypothesis was too clean living, you reset your immune system, it's looking for something else to do, essentially. So it decides to set up allergies. And then there are a couple of interim risk factors that have come through. For example, delayed introduction of allergenic foods, which was the trend up to quite recently, up to, maybe 7 years ago, that the information given by pediatricians and societies worldwide was, if you have a family history or your kid has eczema, no nuts till they're 3, no egg till they're 1. And this has actually backfired on us. We now know that delayed introduction of allergens probably causes more harm than good. So those kind of trends could have contributed. The increased use of anti-acid could have contributed. So lots of the greater sort of westernized diet, more preservatives, more fats, more bad carbohydrates could also mean that our systems are not as protective against allergens. So all those things can contribute. And then in the last few years, the focus has kind of shifted from the hygiene hypothesis to what's called the microbiome hypothesis, which is essentially trying to explain the hygiene hypothesis. But essentially, the microbiome hypothesis suggests that we have a set of bugs of bacteria and fungi and viruses on many surfaces of our body. So on the skin, in the gut, even in our respiratory tree. And these have an important role to play and need to live in good harmony with good variety. And if they are of good variety, living happily together, they promote a good immune system. So the microbiome hypothesis has suggested that disturbance of our microbiome over time in the gut, in the skin, in the airway has resulted in a shift in which our immune systems aren't actually doing as well and are causing more allergies, which is a response to something that should be harmless, and are probably also causing more autoimmunity, which is a response to yourself molecules, where you start attacking yourself. So things have shifted towards the microbiome hypothesis. Here in South Africa, we did a study. If anyone out there knows South Africa, it's a very, call it the Rainbow Nation. It's a very rifted country. So I live in the city of Cape Town, in a leafy suburb, similar to, it looks like you live out there. I can see the lovely garden in the background. And then we get our townships where people live in shacks and squalor, but have adopted a westernized lifestyle in terms of their diet and their cleaning practices. And then there is the country. So the very rural areas. And the rural areas are sort of still quite old-fashioned in how they live. They live in huts. They smear cow dung on the walls. Their kids run around barefoot. They have cows in the yard. They have goats and wild pigs in the yard. The kids play in the grass and the ground all day long. And guess what? In those rural areas, the incidence and prevalence of allergies has been found to be significantly lower than in our westernized, urbanized area. And that's a little signal for us. Do they still have a much healthier microbiome from a young age that's protecting them against allergies? They live in a less clean environment. They eat more natural foods. They play around in the dirt. And actually, at the end of the day, they drink unpasteurized milk. Not that we're suggesting that at all, but this is a signal that this rich microbiome in which they live is probably still very protective. And tragically, as people throughout the world urbanize, they're losing this protection. And in fact, if you have someone from a less urbanized country moving to a more urbanized country, the next generation has a strikingly high prevalence of allergies because they lost their protection.
And our water, there's a lot of, chemicals, chlorine and stuff going into our water too.
Yeah, that could all be contributing. Absolutely.
Many. I like to say it's not one reason. I believe that many things are caused by, could be thousands of reasons, little things.
Absolutely. That's why I say I'm giving you the current theories out there, but there's not one that stands out. But what is absolutely clear is that worldwide allergies have increased, not just in the States and in the UK and Australia, but now also in Africa, in India, in China. So it's a worldwide phenomenon. So we must be doing something wrong throughout the world. In Australia, their slogan is 1 in 10, because 10% of kids have a confirmed food allergy there. That's high. That means you have a classroom if you have a grade with 100 kids, up to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them could have a food allergy. And this can completely change the strategies and the feeding strategies and the emergency strategies of a school, of an airline, etc.
Well, thank you so much for beautifully explaining each of those different hypotheses, or how do you say the plural of that hypothesis?
Yeah, hypotheses, quite right.
And I do remember each of those. And I love to hear about the microbiome being the most current one. That's one of my, we talk about the microbiome a lot on here. And it's really interesting and eye-opening to hear that the allergies are going up, not just in the States, but in all modernized and westernized countries and urban areas. And yet the kids out in the country are doing so much better with them. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so you said, before I move on to my next question, I had one more thing I was curious about. You said that you spend just as much time speaking to parents and telling them that their child does not have a food allergy as you do telling them that they do, or not, maybe you didn't say food allergy, but allergy as you do telling them that they do. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I think the modern way, if there's anything wrong with us or our kids, I think we're in a great era of impatience, aren't we? And instant gratification. And we know that. We experience that. I have 4 kids and, they just want answers now. Let's get onto the internet. Let's get the answer. That's the current world we live in. Mm-hmm. And when people are unwell or children are unwell, people want an instant explanation, don't they? And allergies often get used as that explanation. So people would go to their family practitioner and the mum would say, my child's nose is always snotty and snuffly. And the doctor says, oh, yes, it's allergies. Here's your antihistamine. But actually, equally so, it could just be what we call creche syndrome. So the normal phenomenon where the developing immune system is still quite weak. So every virus it encounters is new and it gets sick with every virus. And that's part of growing up. And that's part of making our immune system more sophisticated over time. Mm-hmm. So equally so, it could just be normal childhood illnesses and going from one cold into the next. And then that parent is left uneducated about the normal course of colds and blame it on allergies and maybe take unnecessary allergy medication or, lo and behold, even steroid syrups, etc. So that's an example with a runny nose. Another example with eczema, we said that not all eczema is caused by food allergies. The minority is caused by food allergies. So a 2-year-old kid goes to the family doctor with new onset eczema. They've eaten all the allergens in the past without a problem. They've had dairy, they've had peanut butter, they've had egg, etc. The family doctor says, ooh, that's eczema. You must have an allergy. Now I want you to go on a diet that's wheat-free and milk-free. And this happens all the time. And actually, that can lead to trouble because experience has shown that if you omit an allergen from your diet for a long period of time, it can actually cause an allergy, because you are disrupting that state of tolerance that you're in with that allergen. So it can do more harm than good. That's another example. Third example, someone with chronic abdominal pains. Mm-hmm. Okay, so lots of tummy pains, and then you go to whatever, see doctor, and the doctor says, oh, maybe it's the dairy, maybe it's the wheat, but without investigating it appropriately. And once again, the child is on a or adult for that matter is on a strict elimination diet. They maybe don't even get all the nutrients they need. This is often what we see with breastfeeding moms. They get told to go on a strict elimination diet without gathering the facts. These poor ladies are exhausted and tired and sleepless, and now they're living on lettuce and gluten-free bread because someone's told them to take all these allergens out of their diet because their baby's a little bit colicky. So many of these scenarios that I've set for you are actually not due to allergies at all. But on the other hand, if someone is truly allergic, it is so important to get the diagnosis right. Exactly which foods are there? If you're peanut allergic, for example, I always say to my patients, peanut has many, many friends. It's friends with egg, It's friends with the sesame seed. It's actually a legume. So it's great friends with the chickpeas and lentils. It's friends with tree nuts. So you have to make sure that you've tested or asked about all the other allergens to give the patient a comprehensive answer. So equally as important as telling someone you don't have an allergy, this is the reality, is if someone does have an allergy, telling them exactly what it is, exactly how to eliminate it, and then what the emergency management is, should there be a mistaken ingestion, for example.
So I have a question about that. So it seems like, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around, okay, so in the country where people are being, more dirty, they're drinking, playing in the mud, they're not cleaning everything with Clorox wipes, and they're eating real food, more natural food. They have less allergies. But then in the modernized world, we're seeing tons and tons of new allergies, severe ones too. Like sometimes I have one nephew and one niece about the same age with severe allergies. They'll go to the intensive care at the hospital if they encounter one. So what is causing that, do you think? Same thing, possibly? I know it's all just a hypothesis and, we're just exploring, but it's going up. Do you believe that can be reversed in any way over time or desensitized? Or is it just once? I know this is all kind of an exploration and you do not have here, Emily, I have the answer. But,
Yeah.
But man, I'm just curious about it. What have you?
So I don't have any more clever answers for you there. Suffice it to say that as allergies have increased, you're quite right in speculating that the multiplicity has increased. So it's more common for a child to have multiple food allergies if they're food allergic, and the severity has increased. So it is severe food allergies leading to anaphylaxis and that intensive care scenario that you've described. They are also on the increase. And it's probably part of the same overall mechanism. Yes, can we reverse it? Well, I think in order to reverse something, you have to know the causes. But I can give you an example. There was a big study in the United Kingdom called the LEAP study, Learning Early About Peanut Allergy, which really made headlines in 2015 when it was first published. And this group of investigators, and I was actually lucky enough to be in the UK when this study started, so we were part of the recruitment, but then I came back to South Africa in the middle of the study. This particular study showed that in children at high risk of food allergies, such as children with eczema or children with egg allergy, have a particular high risk of peanut allergy, it's actually much more beneficial to get the peanut in early, as long as you've had a good assessment by someone who knows what they're doing, who then tells you, okay, it's safe to do so. Much more beneficial to get the peanut allergen early than after a year of age. And it's significantly reduced the number of peanut allergic kids in this group of kids who were actually at higher risk of peanut allergy than the general population. So that study showed that this delayed introduction is certainly not beneficial and probably harmful. And that's changed our practice. You talk about reversing something. So now when I have a kid with eczema at 4 months or 5 months, when they're just starting solids, I actually test them. I do a set of skin prick tests for the main allergens. And if they are negative to peanut, we get that food in quickly and regularly. So that's a strategy, an example of a strategy that could be used to reduce the number of food allergies. And sort of clutching onto the strategies, a number of companies have even already devised like an allergen mix to introduce to babies early in a very simple form. Yeah. And in Australia, who, as I say, are at the forefront of food allergies, with 10% of young kids having a food allergy, they've now implemented education in the baby clinics, where they do vaccinations and immunizations at a young age, 4 months, 5 months, really educating those mums about early introduction of allergenic solids. And already they have seen a reduction in the number of peanut allergic kids and those who've been educated. So from the point of view, once we have proper evidence like this LEAP study with peanut allergy, we can apply it, but we don't have evidence for everything.
Right.
There was another strategy that became popular also a few years ago, saying, you know what happens if we protect the skin from a very young age and moisturize them every single day with a good, bland, fatty, lipidy moisturizer? Could we prevent eczema and food allergies? And the initial studies were most exciting. But subsequent studies, unfortunately, haven't been quite as successful. So I think our understanding, it's not a simple matter, as you say, it's so multifactorial. But one of the factors that they found in the kids where you moisturize early was actually increased infection of the skin. So there it's important to get, your method of giving your moisturizer correct. For example, if you have a great big tub that you open and put your fingers in and maybe don't wash your hands, it can get infected. And whereas if you maybe have a tube that you squeeze, it would be a better mechanism. So those studies are now underway. Moisturizing from an early age, does it prevent eczema? Does it prevent food allergies? So some of the strategies may be pretty simple. Moisturizing a kid from an early age, introducing food allergens early once you've had a proper assessment, avoiding harsh bath products. So highly perfumed colored bath products, for example, could lead to rubbing off of your great skin barrier. And we know that when your skin barrier is disrupted, this is trouble in the allergy world. So simple messages like that can help. As we start to understand the reasons behind the allergy epidemic, we can start giving the correct advice. But it will be a slow reduction. And one thing we can't reverse quickly, of course, is the genetics. So as the genetic changes have occurred over time, we're not going to undo those in a hurry. But the environmental or the epigenetic changes we can work on.
Okay, so let me see where I have a couple questions here. This one came in from a listener, and it is pretty specific. What can you tell us about food protein-induced enterocolitis, or FPI?
Yeah, food protein-induced enterocolitis syndrome is shortened to FPIs. It's also one of these food allergies that seems to have increased quite significantly over time. It's a very different type of food allergy because you don't immediately get your classical signs of hives and swelling and shortness of breath. The reaction only occurs classically between 1 and 3 hours after ingestion of the food, and it can lead to prolific vomiting and sometimes also diarrhea. But they can vomit and vomit and vomit almost to the point of dehydration. In fact, 15% of these kids come into the ER as septic. So because it's such a delay between eating the allergen and having the reaction, it's often left undiagnosed for a long time. The other peculiar thing about it, it's not an immediate or IgE-mediated food allergy, so your allergy test will be negative, which is another factor which has led to delayed diagnosis. So it's only once often the caregiver said, oh, this is odd. Every time I give my kid oats, they vomit 1 hour later. And then we can recognize the pattern. And because they can vomit to exhaustion, we have to be very careful about avoiding that allergen. But often they've outgrown it. For the liquids like cow's milk or soy, often already by 3 years. And for the solid foods a bit later, so classically around 5 years of age or so.
Oh, wow. They can outgrow it?
Oh, yes. This is one of the allergies that are typically outgrown. Many allergies are typically outgrown, especially cow's milk, soya, wheat, and egg allergy are already outgrown in the majority of cases, sort of by school-going age. Whereas our nut allergies and our seafood allergies are usually in 80% of cases more persistent and can persist into adulthood.
Mm. Wow. So that's good news. So there seems to have been a rise, speaking of wheat, there seems to have been a rise in food allergy in the news lately, a lot about gluten intolerance. And you also kind of just touched on that a little bit, intolerance versus, so it's allergy. So the two different tests are called IgG, it's IgG and...
Okay, so this is, I think this is something we should talk about.
Yes.
So the difference between an allergy and an intolerance. Yeah. So an allergy is a reaction to a food which involves your immune system. So your immune cells are involved, and they can either be mediated by this IgE, and those are the allergies that are typically hives and wheals and swelling and can be picked up easily on your allergy test. But it can also be a non-IgE mediated allergy like the F-pies that your listener was talking about. But that is an allergy. In other words, it's potentially dangerous, and you should avoid it strictly until such time as your doctor, whoever's looking after you, tells you, it looks like we're outgrowing it. An intolerance is a reaction to a food that doesn't involve your immune cells at all. So most intolerances are at the level of the gut, and it's more of a digestive issue. Wheat or gluten that's a complicated one because you can get a true allergy. You can get something called celiac disease, which is an immune reaction where you're actually attacking your own immune cells, your own gut lining, if it's had wheat or gluten. So that's something that we can diagnose with a blood test and a biopsy if needed. But I'd say the vast majority of the mischief that wheat causes is actually an intolerance. So it's a digestive issue. In other words, you can have a little bit and you're okay, but if you have a lot, you don't feel great. You might feel bloated or headachy or even achy, or it causes constipation or diarrhea or irritable bowel syndrome. So an intolerance, often you can manage a little bit, but you can't manage a lot. And it's not dangerous. It's irritating, whereas an allergy is potentially dangerous and you avoid it in all the forms that you react to entirely.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And sometimes these intolerances you can grow out of them, right? I've been working on some of those myself. Some of them I have not been able to grow out of, or I heal from, I should say, heal my gut enough that I can reintroduce them, but some of them I can. So is that due to the health of your gut?
I think that's probably closely related, Emily. We're sort of moving out of the realm of classical allergies here, so less in my comfort zone.
Yeah, okay.
But, you do get the notion, if, say, you've got irritable bowel syndrome and you're going through a really bad time, then you might also find that any wheat you eat really irritates it. But then you're going through a slightly better time, there's less stress in your life, your gut's doing a bit better, and then you might tolerate a little bit of wheat. So it doesn't just depend on if your gut's healed enough to manage. It's probably more of a holistic approach. So outgrowing intolerances, if you've got a lactose intolerance, for example, it means that you actually just purely don't have enough of the enzyme, which digests lactose, which is the sugar in all mammals' milk. So if you've got a lactose intolerant that started at the age of 5, you're not going to outgrow that because permanently you're just not going to make enough of the lactase enzyme.
Got it.
But if you are a little baby and you don't have quite enough lactase enzyme because your gut's still underdeveloped, you might have diarrhea when you have too much lactose, but at the age of 1, you're absolutely fine because your gut has matured and is now making enough enzyme. So there's no one size fits all. It depends on the patient, the underlying pathophysiology, the underlying cause, etc., etc. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But what you implied in a way is this whole notion of the leaky gut syndrome, which has become quite buzzword where, if we say that if our gut is unhealthy, it's just inflamed. And when it's inflamed, it leaks and it lets things through and it lets infections through and allergens through that it wouldn't normally let through. So you can become more reactive if you are going through a stage in which your gut lining is not healthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I do believe that. I think that it takes some testing, though, and time is a lot of digging and time. I don't think that people can just or should just assume that they have that.
Yes.
That's the thing about it. It's wonderful to know your body and to really learn it, but it does take a lot of time. Okay, so if a parent is listening to this podcast now and is simply not sure if food has been causing their child's symptoms, what do you recommend that they do? What would their next step be?
It depends entirely on the symptoms. So if it's a little baby who's breastfeeding and is getting intermittent severe eczema or hives when it drinks from the breast, then they must see an allergist, because the allergist can do tests and work out exactly what food that the mum is ingesting might be causing this allergy in the baby. So that's an easy scenario. If it's a kid who has, for the first time ever, eaten chicken with a fancy sauce, and the sauce contains peanuts and cashew nuts, etc., and the child has a reaction, and you think, oh, what was the cause of it? Then you go to an allergist and they do the relevant test, and they might say, oh, the kid's allergic to cashew nut, but not to peanut. If it's more subtle, like kids with recurrent abdominal pain, but not any hives or swelling, it might still be worth going to see your pediatrician or your allergist so they can say, look, this looks like an allergy, or this actually doesn't look like an allergy. It's probably functional abdominal pain, which is like irritable bowel in kids. Maybe the kid's going through a stressful time or is a little bit constipated, and that can mimic allergies. So I think regardless, if you think, oh, do I have an allergy? Don't assume you have. Rather get the evidence.
Okay. So where can our listeners find out more about your work?
Well, they don't really need to find out about my work. I hope that I've enlightened you with some of my answers. I'm based in South Africa, so I'm not sure if I'm of great use to you, but I have a website. I have two websites, and I'd love your listeners to go to my websites. The one is my work website, so the allergy website, and that is www.kidsallergy.co.za, and that is KIDSALLERGY.co.za. And my more general, like parenting, mothering, general pediatric, which I'm so excited about, I'm just about to launch, so please look in the next week or two, is drclaudiagray.com. So drclaudiagray.com. And there will be also Instagram, Dr._Claudia_Gray for that, just looking at the latest research in pediatrics, parenting tools. I say real information because I'm a parent and I'm a professor and I'm a pediatrician, the 3 Ps. So, and I know how much rubbish is out there. So I'd like people to get it right. But I have one thing that I quickly wanted to mention, Emily, because I know that you, one of your goals is to look at kids with brain or neurological issues. And I thought that I'd be out of my depth because I thought you'd ask me a lot of questions about food allergies and autism, etc. But I'd like to just alert you to some pieces of recent snippets of information that might be of relevance. And you said that you're very interested in the microbiome, and so you should be, because not only in the world of allergy is this playing a role, but also in the world of psychology, possibly autism, things affecting the brain, because we now know that the brain has got a very important immune system too. So if our microbiome is a little bit faulty in the gut, it can send signals to the brain and can disrupt things there.
Yeah.
That's one thing to know. The other thing to know is a child with severe chronic allergies. So I'm busy writing an article for a journal on the quality of life in kids with eczema, and it's been so eye-opening. Kids with severe eczema, how their quality of life suffers, and that these kids often don't just have physical problems, but psychosocial problems, and even an increase in autism and social issues and behavioral issues. And one of the thoughts is not only the sleep deprivation because of the itching, but also the generalized inflammatory response that comes from this inflamed allergic skin sends out chemicals throughout the body. Those chemicals can also settle in the brain. So it's this interplay between the gut, the health, the microbiome of the skin, the inflammatory markers that are released through our bodies, and the brain just goes so far in explaining why a healthy brain is so dependent on a healthy body as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that and for your thoughtfulness for our community. And my last question, and you may have just answered it, is always, is there anything else that you would like to share with the Brain Possible community to be complete?
Oh, now you've caught me off guard. But, I think from an allergy point of view, as I said, people are very quick to look for a quick answer. Just like a lot of patients want to blame things on allergies, it's not always the case. So, especially with neurological problems, autism, behavioral issues, a lot of people are quick to blame it on the foods. They might be contributing, but look at the bigger picture. You're probably not going to find a quick fix by just removing dairy from the diet or just removing wheat from the diet. And I say this with the greatest compassion because I don't want people to think that simple moves are going to fix everything. So once again, it's this importance of the multidisciplinary approach. Yeah. And for anyone with a kid who's chronically ill, an understanding physician and having a team behind you that look at things from different approaches is so important. Try not to ride the journey on your own because it's hard and lonely.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we covered a lot here. Thank you so much for diving into allergies with me today. It is, we're probably 50 episodes in, and allergies come up a lot, and I've never had the opportunity to speak with someone, a specialist in this area. So I learned a lot, and I hope that you enjoy your evening. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation today and that you learned something new. Do you have a question for Professor Gray? Does your child have a food allergy? If so, what is it and how do you cope? What has that experience been like for you? We would love to hear from you. Email us at info@thebrainpossible.com. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share our podcast if that feels true for you. You may also consider visiting our website for more information on stories, therapies, and products that we think that you will love. As always, thank you for spending your precious time with us. We know that your time is valuable, and see you next week.